Bradley Smith was up and out of the saddle looking for some grip.
Look, everyone knows Harley and Indian have a rivalry. Do they realize how old that rivalry is and where it stemmed from? Because at the start of the 20th century, these were two young American motorcycle companies trying to prove themselves through speed, endurance, and public spectacle. This is a bit of the story of how Harley-Davidson and Indian became rivals, how that rivalry changed as America changed, how one brand survived while the other disappeared for decades, and how somehow they both found their way back to racing again. The company that became Indian Motorcycles dates its first bike to 1901, with Harley following in 1903. Right from the beginning, both understood that competition sold bikes. If your machine could survive abuse and beat the other guy, that was better than any poster or sales pitch. And in the early years, Indian hit real hard. It built an early reputation through competition, endurance, and speed, and one of the most important dates in this rivalry is 1911, when Indian famously took first, second, and third at the Isle of Man TT, which is a huge statement that an American company could dominate one of the toughest races in the world. Meanwhile, Harley was building its own reputation, but with a slightly more complicated relationship to racing. Harley competed early and used racing to prove itself, yet parts of the company were wary of ultra-specialized race bikes that had little to do with ordinary road riders. And that's important because it shows Harley and Indian were never just mirror images of each other. Then came the board track era. Giant banked wooden tracks, huge speeds, minimal safety, splinters, crashes, and death. The board tracks turned motorcycle racing into spectacle, and the two biggest American names were central to that world. But the same thing that made board track racing thrilling also made it unsustainable. The danger was extreme, the costs were high, and the bad publicity kept piling up. Arthur Davidson himself was openly skeptical of board track racing and worried that the danger, mounting fatalities, and sensational media headlines were turning competition into what he called poor advertising, dismissing the tracks themselves as murder drones. Eventually, the sport that helped build the rivalry also burned itself out. But the rivalry did not die with the boards, it just changed shape. After the board tracks faded, the two brands kept meeting in other forms of competition and public identity. Motorcycle hill climbing, for example, is often linked in its early popularization to Indian, which used steep climbs around Springfield to show off the strength and power of its machines. Indian was also well known in the broader early era for speed records, endurance runs, and racing success outside the board tracks. Harley, meanwhile, kept deepening its competition roots and would eventually become inseparable from American flat track in particular, where it built one of the greatest competition legacies in the sport. So this was never just one rivalry on one kind of track. It was a rivalry that kept finding new arenas.
And then the world changed. Motorcycles were not just race weapons or mechanical experiments. They became transport, leisure, identity, culture, and war played a really big role in what happened next.
And yeah, both Harley and Indian built military motorcycles during World War II. Harley's most famous wartime machine was the WLA, often nicknamed the Liberator, and it became one of the best known military motorcycles of the era. And Indian also built bikes for war, but they were less successful in securing the same US military position, with many Indian machines going instead to allies or remaining niche compared with Harley's wartime dominance.
And this matters because war doesn't just shape factories, it shapes memories. Harley came out of that period with a stronger military myth attached to its name. Then comes the biggest turning point in this story.
Grow cold as girls grow old, and we all lose our our charms in the end.
That is the year the original Indian Motorcycle Manufacturing Company ceased operations and stopped production. That is why Indian faded for so long. It was not simply less cool or less tough. It was gone, finished as an original manufacturer. But the brand name survived thanks to Brockhouse Engineering Company in England, who were manufacturing, among other things, the foldable 98cc bike called the Corgi, which was branded as the Papoose in the US.
I want one of these!
As sales fell, a deal was made to sell Royal Enfields rebadged as Indians. And this happened multiple times through the 60s and 70s as the name was bought, used to rebadge other bikes, and then sold again. And during all this time, well, Harley kept building bikes, building dealers, and building a culture. And unfortunately, Indian became a memory. And culture rewards continuity. That's why Harley became the brand most associated with the post-war chopper scene and the outlaw biker image. The classic American chopper and bad boy mythology really exploded in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And Harley was there. It was still making big American V-twins, it still had a dealer network, it had wartime credibility, domestic visibility, and a living factory. Indian, by contrast, had lost its continuous manufacturing life back in 1953, right before that culture really took hold. And that's why the rivalry went quiet for so long. Not because people forgot, but just one fighter had left the ring. And then the comeback begins. 2011, Polaris acquired Indian and finally gave the brand what it had lacked for decades. Serious investment, serious product development, and a real strategy. Polaris moved production, rebuilt the line, launched new machines, and turned Indian from a historical ghost into a modern manufacturer with actual momentum. And then it did the most sensible thing possible. It went racing. How? In modern American flat track, Indian's FTR 750 became a monster after its 2017 debut, piling up wins, podiums, and championships. The FTR 750 earned 104 wins from 138 races and secured 8 consecutive Grand National Championships before the bike's era closed. That did not just put Indian back on track, it made the rivalry alive again. Yeah, and flat track was not the only place this happened. And in the modern era, Harley and Indian also collided in King of the Baggers, where Moto America describes the series as a Harley-Davidson Indian rivalry from day one. It's a completely different kind of spectacle from board track racing, but the basic magic is weirdly similar. Big American twins, big personalities, big crowds, and a public fight over who owns the moment. So no, this story is not just board tracks were crazy, and it's not just, well, Harley also has racing heritage. It's the longer, stranger story of two American Titan brands that started as racing rivals, drifted apart as history pulled them in different directions, and then found themselves meeting again in front of a crowd. From 1901 and 1903 to 1911 to 1953 to 2011 to the modern flat track and bagger racing, the bikes changed, the tracks changed, and America has changed. But that rivalry never really died. It just waited for its next green flag.